Okay, so today we're going to start our third discussion on lighting. We're going to be dealing with larger environments. So it's going to get a little formulaic now because when we light from the inside, which is what we're going to be working on today, interior, during the day, generally we've got things like windows that provide us a lot of light. Most of the time, if it is a bright sunny day, there's enough windows, we can generally get away without turning on any lights. Unless you go into a room that happens to have no windows, or it's got a window, it's got facing a wall from a building across the way. Nighttime is generally when we don't have enough illumination from the outside where we start to rely on our man-made light. So we've got two scenarios for you, a daytime version and a nighttime version, which you guys will try to match the reference. Now, there are no, personal comps that you guys are required to do. If you want to experiment, that's fine, but you're not turning anything in for us. The daytime and the nighttime are going to chew up quite a bit of your time. The daytime is actually fairly simple. There are a couple of lights in it. One is a directional light for what kind of object? Sun. So that would be our sun. We've also got another light in the window. It's an area light, which acts like the ambient or bloom light that you would get from an environment. We're also going to be using image-based lighting with a high dynamic range image inside the IBL. And that will give us color. It'll give us reflections when we get around to it. Now, it's really important, and everybody eyes up front, please. Eyes up front. Okay, this part's really important. Project 4 and Project 5, you must keep them because they are eventually going to turn into Project 6 and 7. Okay, so once you get done lighting the interior day and night and the exterior day and night, we're going to work on materials in both of those scenes. And then for Project 7, you guys are going to pick one of them and work it all the way through for texturing. Okay, but it's imperative that you keep all your files because the last thing you want to do is have to relight everything and start from scratch. Is that clear? Okay, good. I just want to make sure. No surprises for that. Today marks another turning point. We're going to be using unified sampling from this point forward. Unified sampling, a simpler approach than using legacy. Now, we do not mandate that you use unified sampling, but we do want you to try it out for the first scene here. Now, the reason we say that is because if you give us a good render, and I don't open up Maya, am I going to know whether you use legacy or unified if you do a good job? No, absolutely not. The point is, we're trying to teach you a different approach. Unified sampling works a lot more like RenderMan, Arnold, V-Ray, and the new version of Mental Ray that's coming up. Okay, so we want you to get used to using this approach to rendering. It is simpler. I think you guys are going to like it. It does require a different set of thought processes and a little bit different workflow. But I think you'll like it. We're going to go over that also. So, office hours, still no open labs, which I suspect will probably not happen until next month at the earliest. Once we get all situated with the labs and everything, I know that you're working on air conditioning and all kinds of other stuff in there. 10 to 12, 2 to 4 tomorrow. I have office hours. I can be available other times. You just need to make an appointment with me. Okay, a little bit of a review. Yesterday, or on Monday, we introduced the Mental Ray area light. So what is the shadow softness control for the Mental Ray area light?
Scale.
Scale, absolutely. Did it change from the Maya? No, same thing. How about shadow quality?
High samples.
High samples, that did change. What is different between Mental Ray area light and Maya? Well, you use light shape on, that does it. But as far as shadows go, what happens, what's the difference between the mental ray and the Maya area light? Quality, yep, it wraps around the subject. What else?
It takes less time to get the same quality. Like for the Maya area light, you need to turn a ton of the rays on, the shadow rays on, and even that, you get the same quality as the mental ray area light.
Right. And the mental ray area light, the quality control for the shadows is what? Is what? Now that's final gathering. Don't confuse it. You want to same. Don't. Okay. All right. Shadow quality, mental ray area light. Max samples. You guys said it earlier. Okay. If max samples are the control, shadow rays are disabled. Remember that. Mental ray area light, shadow rays. You can adjust them all you want, nothing's going to happen. The max sample is the control for quality, for the light and for shadows. All right, now before we jump in and we start trying to render and we start trying to put lights in our interior scene, we're going to talk a little bit about interpreting camera exposure. All right, and camera exposure is basically how the camera sets itself up, whether you're inside or whether you're outside, and also it adjusts itself automatically for light levels. Who here does not have a smartphone with a camera? That's what I thought. Everybody's got a camera. Okay, if you take a picture inside here, your camera will do a couple of things, your phone. First off, it will adjust what's called the aperture automatically for you. That's the opening. When you click the button to take your picture, it's a little digital shutter. Okay, it creates either a small opening for a lot of light or a big opening for not much light. It also adjusts the speed at which the shutter goes off. Okay, again, if it's low light, it stays open a little longer to let more light in to the sensor. If it's really bright, it goes off quicker so it does not overexpose the image, so it doesn't damage the sensor also. So, what we need to do is figure out, when we deal with different types of reference, what we see in a camera is going to be different than what our eyes see. Our eyes are really good at automatically adjusting for dark and light. Right? So if you look around the room where there's no lights here, just where it's dark, you can see fairly well. Okay? If you take a look outside the door in the window there, your eyes adjust really well for the light that's there, automatically. If you do the same thing with the camera, if you set your camera up close over here and it detects low light and then turn it over and take a picture, it will probably make that window look super bright, much brighter than what you see with your eyes. All right, so here's a couple examples. Okay, the light level, and this was done with a digital camera. This was done with my phone. All right, so light level here, I adjusted the camera so it could look more or less natural outside. But notice the inside is dark. I don't have much contrast in it. Okay, a lot of dark shadowy area. I adjust the camera exposure to get a good shot inside. Look what it does to the outside. Okay, because the camera's adjusted here, all of a sudden outside the window looks super bright, almost blown out. All right, same thing here. Indenting. All right, low level here, sitting in a booth, took a picture. All right, camera automatically adjust it for inside. Outside looks very bright. I put the camera outside or right on the window. The camera adjusts itself for the outside exposure. Now the outside does not look blown out, but the inside is too dark. Does that make sense? You guys have probably all seen this in your pictures at some point, but maybe never realized what it's doing. Right, so we have to decide, what are we lighting for? Are we lighting so it looks good outside the window? Or are we going to light so it looks good inside? And the answer is generally going to be, we want it, if we're inside with our CG camera and our CG world, we're going to make it so it looks good inside. And what we want to do is create that slightly overexposed or very bright look outside the window. We can do that with our IDL and the image that's inside of it. There are controls for us, fortunately, where we can do that. Okay, this is kind of a simple yet very important thing to get a handle around. Does anybody have any questions at all? Need another example or anything? Don't be afraid. Okay. Just want to make sure. Right. Interior light. This is done with what's called a Brawley box. Very similar to what you saw with digital camera world when they had basically an umbrella that bounces light off. We call it a strobe. Okay, this is a strobe. It's basically a flash, big, not big, but a small, very bright spotlight that goes off for just a fraction of a second. The light in this looks just like an umbrella. The light hits that umbrella, reflects most of the light, yet allows some of the light to go through because the material is slightly translucent. So this single light allows us to get a room that looks like it's fairly well lit. And we get that because light continues to bounce off of different surfaces. Now, in CG, we do not get all of this bounce for free. We get some of it, if you remember, we went over final gathering. All right, so if we were doing this in CG, what kind of light would we use here? Area light, probably. We would definitely have an area light pointed in this direction. What would we do about the light on this side? Because we're not going to get that for free. Yep, another area light, why not? We'll make more if we need it. Okay, so we got another light. This is going to be brighter. It's going to be a little less intense. Now, final gathering, remember, final gathering shoots out points to figure out what's going on in your scene. Right? So the points are going to shoot out, they're going to hit these white walls. Those points are then going to shoot out rays all around. Now, our rays, by default, are going to hit their destination and stop. In final gathering, we can make it bounce further, but final gathering has a limit of just 5 what they call secondary bounces. Now, the trouble with final gathering is it tries to give us sort of the same real world bounce results that we get, but it doesn't quite do it because as you increase each additional secondary bounce in final gathering, it tends to flatten the scene out. Now, I'm going to show you an example of that, but I want to talk about this first. Okay, so in the real world, light comes out, bounces off the walls, it hits the ceiling, it hits the floors, it continues to bounce around. Quite frankly, until it runs out of places to bounce, or it goes somewhere else, or it gets absorbed. Okay, same thing over here. But in CG, if we do not get the results that we want with our 2 area lights and final gathering, we will probably need to add additional lights in. Now, since we're not doing an animation, we don't have to worry about the camera moving or objects moving through it. We can just look at the scene, look at our render and go, okay, I need some more light up here. I could add a couple more lights called fill light, right? We may be using multiple fill lights in places. So we're after the look, not necessarily trying to recreate the physics. Like I said, we try to recreate the physics, we're probably going to be here another 5 years till they actually get a renderer that will do it the right way. Right, working on it, but we're not there yet. Okay, so here is a photo closer to what we're going to be working with. Not exact, but it does contain some of the same elements. All right, I've got a couple of arrows. The red indicates direct light. The black indicates bounce light. Now, if we're going to set this up and we do not see any additional lights in here, we would probably assume what is going to be the main light source? The sun. All right, besides the sun, what else are we going to get? Think of a day where the sun is behind a cloud cover and it's overcast. Is it completely dark like night? No. So what gives us additional light? Reflections, yeah. But I'm thinking of something even more obvious that you probably discount all the time. Color. But is that really going to give us additional light? It's going to give us color. It's going to contribute to the overall look and tone of the scene. But if the sun is behind the clouds, where is that illumination coming from?
The air.
The what?
The air.
The clouds, the sky. Remember, our sky acts like a big, giant dome light. Okay, because the light from the sun hits our atmosphere, it disperses a little bit, comes down through the different layers of gas, hits cloud cover, diffuses even more. So we're not just getting direct light from the sun. Some of those rays get dispersed, diffused, and scattered across what we call our sky. So even when the sun is not directly visible, we get indirect light from the sky. It acts like a big giant dome of light. All right, so we would normally call that either skylight or sometimes it's called ambient light, because it doesn't really have a direct source that it comes from. Now, in addition to the sun and the sky, you will have things like people said reflections. You'll have color coming in from buildings, maybe vehicles, signs, trees. They're all going to contribute a little bit of illumination in through the window. Now, in CG, we will get a little bit of extra light even without the sun, even without our directional light, but not nearly enough. So in CG, what we do to make up for the loss of light coming in through a window is we will add a light that simulates a window or a portal. So what kind of light do you think would work well for this kind of shape?
Area light.
Yep. Mental ray area light. Why mental ray? Because it will expand out and wrap around. It will be a lot softer. So generally what we do is we will create our image-based lighting sphere. We'll put an image in it. We'll have final gathering turned on. It'll give us a little bit of illumination. We'll do the sun, which is our directional light. Then we'll start adding, wherever we see windows, we'll start adding area lights. Because all those area lights will gradually, remember, lighting's an additive process, so all that light will add up to give us a better result. Does that make sense? Anybody? No? Okay. No, I just want to make sure everybody's on me. All right, so that part's good. Remember, we're dealing with CG, so we're not going to get all this stuff for free. Generally, when you've got a lot of energy coming in, for example, direct sunlight comes in, hits the door. You can tell it's still got a lot of energy. What did it do to the door? Yep, it hits it with such energy, you can't even tell what color it is. Okay, so hits it with a lot of energy. Hits the wall. Still got quite a bit of energy. So it's going to start to bounce around on the floor, it's going to go out, it's going to go up. It's going to start to scatter all around. I can tell you, in CG, we do not get this kind of energy. Wish we did, but we don't. You have to create lights to fake that look, yes. Now, you will get this shape from the window from your directional light. It's just, you will not get the energy from that reflection to hit here. So we would probably use, what kind of light do you think would work good for that kind of shape? Possibly. Could be a spotlight. What else is already a shape like this? Yep. Again, area light. Probably. You could use a spotlight though, because a spotlight you can actually shape with a thing called barn door. But depending on the effect you want, this might work better because this is not a hard shape here. It's very soft. So probably an area light hitting here. Then we might add maybe a spotlight here or a point light or maybe another area light. Right? So we trace that all around. Direct light, it's up here, it's here, it starts to bounce around. Over here, again, plenty of energy. Hits the side of the chair here. You can see it's still got quite a bit of energy. You can see that color hitting the wall. Now, when light particles hit a surface with enough energy where that color transfers over, that's called radiosity. Right? That's color transfer. You can see that color transfer. And that's what final gathering also tries to do. Remember, final gathering looks out, it looks at value, it looks at color, and pulls that back into your scene. That's how it tries to mimic color, value, what we call indirect light. Okay, so same thing up here. A lot of energy, bounces, hits this beam, still got quite a bit of energy. That beam's going to absorb it a little bit, it's going to diffuse it even more, and it's going to continue on its way. Now, once we're done with all the obvious things that we can see and we can trace, then again it comes back to what's going to give us the look that we need. We may have to add some extra light to get the look of the reference. You guys go for art tests or you go to work on something in your portfolio class because you're going to be start using rendering now for all your portfolio stuff. You're going to be using reference. So when you get done with the obvious lights, then you're going for the look. So again, it may be extra light you need to add. All right, today's exercise is designed to kind of help you along with this very process. Interior lighting. So we're gradually building up to larger environments. On Friday, we're going to be working with an exterior environment. And we're going to be dealing with nighttime version of that as well. Okay, unified sampling. Got a PDF? Download it. That should be your Bible for unified sampling. Okay, we put this together so that you guys would have reference in any class you went to. If you understand unified sampling, it will make your life much easier when you switch over or you decide you want to try RenderMan or Arnold or V-Ray or whatever happens to be around at the time. All right, so the whole theory behind unified sampling is it tries to bundle most of the controls into a single slider. Now, if you remember Final Gathering, when I talked about it last lecture, Final Gathering in the legacy portion had a whole bunch of different controls. It had point density, it had accuracy, it had point interpolation. All that was rolled into one slider. Does anybody remember what that slider was called? If you're not sure, pull it up, look at it. What's that? Well, yeah. All right, it's going to be in your render settings under quality. But you remember what that slider was?
Indirect.
Yes, indirect diffuse quality, right? That indirect diffuse quality adjusted point density, it adjusted accuracy, it adjusted interpolation, it adjusted all that stuff for you. Now, the only thing it did not do was add secondary bounces, but that's a fairly simple thing to do. You just go down, you add 1 or you add 2. We generally don't go any higher than that. Now, with unified sampling is a little different, actually it's a lot different than legacy. Remember, legacy sampling was contrast-based, purely contrast. Okay, so if it saw a dark area next to a light area, that was considered high contrast. If it saw a gray area next to a slightly darker or slightly less dark gray area, that was considered low contrast, and it would not put many samples in there. In addition to the min and the max samples, what else did we have? What else did you guys worry about adjusting for fine detail? Anti-aliasing contrast. Remember that threshold slider? Right, so those 3 controls are done away with in unified sampling. And what unified sampling does is it uses a rendering algorithm called quasi-Monte Carlo, which is basically path detection. It takes a look at, it treats your image like terrain. It looks at it, it looks not just for contrast, but it looks where lines appear to be going, and it looks at the separation between light and dark pixels. And tries to figure out whether they need to be blended together or they need to have the contrast remain. Fine. To sum it up for you, the thing that unified sampling does, if you keep all of your shadow settings and light quality settings at the default setting, which means shadow rays at 1, for an area light, max sample level of 8. If you keep them at a minimum, unified sampling will go in there and try to clean up the noise for you. So what it tries to do is one slider will take care of all of your quality needs. Now, it does not, like I said, it does not use contrast, so you do not get groups of pixels clumped together. Remember you got the stair stepping in some of your stuff when it was really low? What this does is it creates a feathering. Remember how soft your shadows get and they get noisy? Well, unified sampling kind of approaches the whole scene like that until you throw more quality at it. The overall control for this is called overall quality. That will automatically increase the minimum samples, the maximum samples for you in one shot. There is no anti-aliasing contrast control. And quite frankly, this slider starts off at 0.25. 0.25 is considered preview quality. That would be equivalent to 0 in legacy sampling. Pretty quick, fairly, not quite as noisy, believe it or not, as legacy. Now, the slider itself only goes to like 2 or 2.5. But you can go well beyond that just by typing a number in. So you want to make sure you've got advanced settings turned on. Underneath the sampling section, once you have unified sampling running, there's an advanced overall sampling section. And you'll see auto samples checked on. Again, like I mentioned, auto samples, it will automatically adjust the minimum, maximum samples for you just based on that overall quality slider. This approach is commonly called brute force rendering. All advanced renderers pretty much use brute force rendering. They throw tons of samples. And when I say tons, I mean hundreds, thousands. In the case of RenderMan, it can throw millions in your scene. Now, it sounds a little bit scary because we're used to legacy sampling where you probably go 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, and you've already got a huge render hit. Right, but when you start to double unified sampling, it's not an exponential render hit. It gets longer, but not exponentially longer. So if I double it from 0.25 to 0.5, it's not going to take twice as long. It may take another quarter of a second to render. If I take it from 0.25 to 1, it may take another second to render. Okay, if I take it from 1 to 2, it may take another 2 or 3 seconds to render. Okay, but it's not going to be a huge hit. Now, depending on the complexity of your scene, that's where the calculations can slow down. Unified sampling is really good at doing complex scenes, but not quite as efficient as legacy, because legacy is much simpler. It can handle simple things really good. But unified sampling handles complicated things much more efficiently and better. Personally, I like using it for both. I don't care if my simple scenes take a second or 2 longer to render. Doesn't matter to me. I like the quality of it.
If 0.25 is preview, what is production?
Production, we start at 1. And you can work your way up. Now, to be honest, in the interior scene, you may go as high as 4, maybe 5, maybe all the way up to 8, maybe even 10, depending on your settings. And by settings, I mean if you've gone in and you have not adjusted any of the defaults, you can crank up the numbers pretty high, get results. All right, so the whole idea behind this is to eliminate the need to adjust individual minimum, individual maximum samples to go through 2 or 3 different areas. All right, so overall quality, that's your main slider. Okay, underneath, it's usually collapsed and hidden, are auto samples. They will adjust the min and the max automatically. Once you get used to unified sampling and you have gotten some time with it under your belt and you are a little more advanced user, you can turn off auto samples and you can adjust the minimum and maximum by yourself. One word of caution, if you do that, you can get yourself into a really long render if you increase the maximum or the minimum samples a lot. The minimum sample number is meant to be small. That minimum sample number is considered the starting point for the entire scene. So if you crank that up to 10, you're telling everything in your scene, you're going to start with 10 samples and then work your way up to the maximum. Don't do that. You think I'm kidding, but every month I get somebody with an hour render and they've cranked up shadow rays, they've cranked up the max samples in their area lights, they've cranked up the minimum samples. Once we get all those settings down, we can usually get it under 10 minutes. All right, for now, I personally would recommend that you leave it on, but if you want to experiment on your own, go for it. I'm totally for that. Play around with it. Get your face slapped. All right, now, unified sampling has the ability to show us where all the sampling is going. It's kind of a long, tedious process to do. I used to show it, but quite frankly, nobody ever uses it. And I generally only need to use it if there's a real problem with your render. Most render problems we can figure out just by looking at your setting. All right, but diagnose samples, if you guys want to play around with it, go ahead. I'll warn you that when you turn on diagnose samples and hit the render button, not only do you get a preview of your render in the render view, but it will also create a separate file for you. And you have to load it into this special viewer that Mental Ray came up with. And quite frankly, that's going to go away with the new version of Mental Ray if it ever comes out for 2017. So that's another reason I stopped showing it. If you really want to learn about it and you've got a real issue, I'm happy to go over it with you, but it's not really worth taking the time for a tool that you'll probably never use. All right, so I've got the workflow here on how to do that if you so desire. And basically that's what it looks like when you use it. Anything white is maximum samples. Anything black is minimum samples. It'll just show you what the renderer is looking at. And you can see if you've got a lot of grain here where there are shadows that are really soft, like right around the edges here, you can see there's a lot of samples going on because it's trying to create a good quality shadow. Couple examples of renders. All right, takeaway from it. Quality, when you first start your lighting, you can keep it at 0.25. That's perfectly good enough. When you want to start to look at the quality of your shadows and the quality of your render, then you can start at 1.0. That is a good production starting point. Like I said, it will increase based on your rendering needs. Min samples, max samples, leave auto samples on, make your life much easier. So one slider to rule them all. Okay? Just like final gathering. Indirect diffuse quality, one slider to rule all of final gathering. So those two sliders should really be the only thing you need to worry about. All right, I'm going to give you, when I go over and give you guys a quick demo, I'm going to show you a little more about final gathering and about unified sampling. Any questions so far on just the overall premise of it? Okay, I think you're going to like it because it is simpler. Just one thing to worry about instead of a whole bunch of things. But like I said, there still are places that use legacy sampling. Okay, today we are going to be using an IBL, which is image-based lighting. It's a sphere. It basically gets created around your whole environment or whatever you have in your scene as far as the model goes. We are going to be plugging in HDRI imagery or high dynamic range images into that IBL. Right. Why do we want to do that? Why don't we just use either a Targa or a TIFF or a JPEG or a PNG? Well, the reason is because a high dynamic range image can theoretically contain all the exposure information from the darkest, dimmest candle or, I guess, starlight up until the brightest sun at noon that we have. And how it does it is it takes multiple images. Most of you have an HDR function in your phone. Anybody here ever use it? Okay, so if you use it, you realize it gives you at least 3 pictures. It'll give you one with low light level, normal light level, and high light level. And what it does is, now on your phone, what kind of format do your phone images give you? Yeah, they're all JPEG. Why? Because you can compress it and make the file size small. Right, now, the HDR images that you create on your phone, you cannot use as they are. You have to take those 3 images into Photoshop, put them together, and there's a Radiance tool in there. Radiance is the program that Photoshop bought to make HDR images. You put them all in as one image. Basically, it comes in like layers. Put it in as one image, and the image format you usually save it out as is either an HDR or an EXR. Right, so what it does is it takes multiple images, takes all the exposure information, puts it into a single image, and that single image is a 32-bit image. Now, the thing that makes this a really big deal, when we're doing 8 bits of information, we generally have 256 levels of gray, right? Between absolute white and absolute black. When you do 16, you have more. When you do 24, you have more. You're up to 16 million. All right, when you get into 32-bit, you've got about 4 billion levels of gray. What that means, it keeps all that exposure information, so when you dial in the exposure in your image, it's not just contrast and brightness, it's actually accessing the whole dynamic range that is in the image. This was developed in the mid-1980s. Okay, mostly for universities, for research, for government, for NASA, because NASA needed to have images from, the space station, the shuttle, any of the astronaut programs. They realized that they needed to have as much information as they could capture and be able to analyze it. Now, at the time, in the 1980s, only big universities, government facilities had enough horsepower to be able to even process images like this. Right? It wasn't until the mid to late 1990s that consumer digital camera sensors got really good. Or I shouldn't say really good, they got better. Now they're really good. Which in 5 years or 10 years we'll think they're crap now. Just like everything else. Right, but the whole idea was, once digital sensors became available to us as consumers, we started to get more pixels, more resolution. It started to make sense that we could actually incorporate high dynamic range images. To give you an idea how old the code is for it, it was originally written in the C language, which is pretty old. It's not ancient, but it's pretty old. Right? C is the precursor of C++ and C# and all modern programming languages that we use now pretty much. Two common formats for this HDR image. One is the actual HDR itself, developed by the Radiance Corporation back in the 1980s. Hey, right around 2000, a little company called ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, developed the format for HDR images. They came up with something called EXR. Now, the EXR format, their whole idea was, let's make this format so we can use high dynamic range images, but let's make it open source. What does open source mean? Everyone can use it. The only thing you have to do is, any code you alter, you have to post it back for the community to be able to use. Right, so, Industrial Light and Magic, out of the goodness of their heart, they developed this for the whole planet? No. What drove their decision? What happened in 2000? Anybody know? What is it? Absolutely movies. That's their bread and butter. Who owned ILM in 2000? Let's do a little film history. George Lucas. George Lucas owned lots of stuff. Skywalker Sound, ILM. He actually owned Pixar when it first started. He sold it off to Steve Jobs, I guess in a poker game or something. I don't know. But the whole idea was they had this thing happening in 2000. And it was what we call confluence of events. What was George Lucas doing around 2000? Yeah, which one? One. It was the reboot of the franchise. Okay, big deal. Why would they develop an image format for that?
Money.
Money? Something even more sinister.
Power.
Yes. Power. The power was Sony came out with a brand new digital camera that was the first film camera capable of large-scale formats. So ILM realized they had a camera that could capture much more information than the consumer could actually digest. Think back around 2000. What was the best format you could view a movie on, other than the theater? What was it?
A big TV.
Big TV, but if you had to view it, you had to play it through something.
VHS.
Actually, there's something else after VHS. DVD. DVD, one of our first digital formats. Remember, Betamax and VHS were all analog formats. So the best digital format you could get was DVD. DVD size, anybody remember what is the resolution of a DVD? Small. Yeah, I know, but what is it? Anybody know? 720 by 486, 480, 405, whatever it happened to be. But 720 was it. Sony's camera was one of the first 2K cameras, which means 2048 by 2048 is what it could capture. Now, at the time, ILM realized we got all this information, we're going to pretty much have to dumb it down to put it on a Blu-ray. We need a format where we can capture this information, process it, keep it in an uncompressed format, not lose anything, and then we can repackage it later. It's all about power and money. So now the money comes in, right? Because you get your DVD, it looks great. It's digital, there's no grain, you don't have to worry about the tape jamming, it crinkling, it degrading over time. But then, what happens after DVD? Blu-ray. So now we're up to 1080. Right? 1920 wide by 1080 high. Blu-ray. So now you have to go buy all the stuff again in Blu-ray because they can look better. And why not throw a couple more digital dinosaurs in all the old movies too, just for the hell of it. Right? But that is what drove them to come up with this. Right? It has since become an industry standard. So pretty much most of the file formats you're going to deal with in compositing and later on are going to be EXRs. There are others, but EXR is still a really big format that's being used. Especially in compositing. It allows us to keep layer information, pass information, so we can have basically an image that contains all the different layers that we'll ever need. A diffuse layer, a reflection layer, a speck layer, an ambient occlusion layer, a shadow layer. You know, you can just keep going on, and it will handle all these different channels and layers. All right, most of what we give you guys, in fact, all of it, this month is going to be the HDR format. Why? Because that's the library that we bought. Not that it's any better or any worse. Now, for those of you that don't know and don't snoop around enough, if anybody's gone to our SAL server, you guys are familiar with the student V filer, right?
No.
You must be. Didn't you guys have to access it in 3DS? Nobody used it?
We know how to get to it, and we forget.
All right. So, for those of you that don't know and care, here is the path for the student V filer for SAL. Right, so you guys know in the Finder, if you don't have a server map, you can go to server, right? It's SMB : / student V filer / SAL. This will show up clean on the archive, and if you've got go to training running, it should show up clean there. Right, so SMB : / student V filer / SAL. That. So when you open it up, you get a couple of things. That folder right there is yours. The library folder. There are extra things in there. There are a couple of extra podcasts. The thing in there that you might be interested in, not right now, don't download it now, it will kill everybody, is the HDR folder. It contains a whole DVD's worth of HDR imagery. High dynamic range images that we use for IDLs. Right, I've also got a couple of other things in there. I've got some common textures like dirt maps and stuff in there. Subsurface scanning. Got a couple of subscriptions. Computer Graphics World. I used to get PDFs of that. I also used to have a subscription to Post Magazine, which is post-processing for film, games, all kinds of stuff. Right now, inside the HDR folder, you'll see two sets of images with the same name. One is HDR, the other is a JPEG. The JPEGs are there for you to preview. The HDRs are what you actually plug into your IDL. Right? The reason that you have the preview is because it takes forever for the Mac preview program to spin up and show you what it looks like, and it may not show you an accurate representation of what it looks like. All right, so that's what most of the HDR images that we give you look like. These are called spherically mapped. The file name, right before the extension, has an LP next to it. That stands for light probe. It's very similar to taking a picture of it in a chrome sphere. What it looks like. It's spherically mapped already. Now, image-based lighting has two different ways of mapping in files. And this goes for RenderMan, it goes for Arnold, as well as Mental Red. All right. If your image is already spherically mapped, you don't need to spherically map it again. You do what's called angular mapping. If you've got a square image or a rectangular image, that you have to spherically map on your image-based lighting sphere. Right, now, you guys don't have to download this stuff because we're going to provide you with HDR images for today. But if you want to grab these at some point during the month so you can have them to work with, by all means do that. But not now, please. All right, so the reason I say that is, here's an example of what they look like. All right, so this is an HDR image, but it's square, it's rectangular actually. This is an HDR image, this is a light probe, it's spherical already. When you create an IDL sphere, the mapping is right here. The default mapping is set for spherical. It's for this image. If you use spherical here, I'll show you what it looks like when I do my demo. Looks like there's a rip in the space-time continuum because it's got all kinds of blue holes. And they put the blue there purposely so you know it's mapped either right or wrong. You got blue showing up, you go, mapped wrong. You change it to angular and it will automatically adjust itself. You don't have to do UVs, you don't have to do anything. I'm waiting someday for UVing to be that simple. Like, I just want to be able to go a button and have everything look great. Now, one other thing that we can do, which we're going to be doing today, is adjusting how the IDL image looks to the camera. Remember, all the way back in the beginning of our discussion, we were dealing with how exposure looks to the camera. So for example, if we want our IDL to look like that, we'll keep our exposure normal. But when we start working on our environment, we need it to look brighter. That's when we have to adjust how bright it looks to the camera. That setting is in the image-based lighting attributes, just like the mapping, down at the bottom under render stats. Right? There's a little switch that we turn on called Adjust Environmental Color Effects. Adjust Environment Color Effect. And what we do, we adjust something called color gain. Now, we've already established that an HDR image is a 32-bit image, high dynamic range. It's got about 4 billion levels of grayscale in it. The Mac, or not Mac, but Maya is a 64-bit program with 32 floating point units after a decimal. Okay, 32 spaces. That's a lot of decimal spaces. Okay, that means that Maya can handle high dynamic range information. All that translates into color gain is going to be white by default. If you want to make something brighter and it's white already, the default color gain in Maya, the slider is going to be all the way to the right, right? Because 0 is black, that's off. White is 1, that's on. If you have to go above 1, you're getting into high dynamic range, you have to click inside the color swatch and it brings up the color picker. The color picker, by default, is in what's called HSV. Hue, saturation, and value. Hue is what? It's the color, right? The base color of whatever your swatch is or whatever you want it to be. Saturation is what? How much color? Dominance. Value. That's the thing that we adjust for HDR imagery. The value by default is set at 1. If you want to go above 1, you have to type that number in, and then we'll reset the slider for you. So in order to go into what we call the super white or high dynamic range area, you got to go above 1 to make your HDR brighter. What it will do is access the exposure information, and then when you render it, it will display properly. Okay, I'm going to show you guys that too. All right, this is the only control you need to worry about to make it appear brighter to the camera. Notice I say appear, because when you guys work outside, we're going to have a different set of problems. Nothing's ever easy, it's CG. If it were easy, everybody would do it. Okay. Any questions so far? All right, this is all theory so far. I'm going to show you how to put it into practice. Here we go. This is a good reference for you guys. We're going to be using unified sampling when we render. Here is a nice little guide, a little chart for you. Either take a picture of it, take a screenshot of it, wait for the archive. All right. This is basically light and shadow information for unified sampling. Okay. To soften the shadows, none of that information is changed. Those lights remain the same. Right? Directional light, shadow softness is going to be light angle. Point light, spotlight is going to be light radius. Area light is going to be the physical size. Now the cleanup for shadows. How noisy or grainy those shadows are. In unified sampling, we're going to leave our shadow rays at 1. What we're going to do, crank up overall quality. It's the greatest lazy man's approach, or lazy person's approach to rendering. All right, so same thing. Directional light, point light, spotlight. Shadow rays at 1. Just crank up overall quality. You'll see it start to clean up. Mental ray. Remember, our area light uses max samples. The default max samples are 8. You can usually leave it at 8. Now, occasionally, if you've got a scene you're working on and one particular light is driving you crazy, it just doesn't seem to want to clean up, instead of cranking up overall quality, what we usually wind up doing is taking that one light and increasing the shadow rays just a little bit. By a little bit, I mean a little bit, because that can kill your entire render. So if the default for shadow rays is at 1, try 2. If not 2, try 4. You shouldn't have to go above 4. Occasionally you might, but for one single light, it's a lot less expensive than cranking up overall quality for the entire scene. Right, so I'm going to demo in Project 4. for you guys. First thing I'm going to do, crank up my, set my project to project 4. Right. Got 2 scenes there. Actually, you got 1 scene. It's the interior day-night. What you're going to want to do is do not work in this original file because you're going to open it up. You're going to save it out. You're going to work on the daytime first. Then when you're done with the daytime, open up the original scene again. Save it out. Work on the nighttime. The nighttime is going to have different lights in it. Different lighting setup. That's why you can't use the same scene file. So you're going to have 2 separate scenes. So when you initially open it up, it's going to be Project 4, Interior Lighting, Day, Night. It's an MA file. It's going to open up to the render cam. Don't forget, you can always go to perspective. If you want to turn off this resolution gate into perspective camera, just click on that white square with a blue circle in it. Right here. And you'll notice that we got this from the internet, the interwebs. So it's triangulated already. It's not the prettiest, but the reason we're using it is because this represents, occasionally you will get scenes that, how should I put this delicately, are not that good. Okay, this isn't terrible, but it's not the greatest. Right? It's about average, which you can expect if you're working somewhere and people are giving you files. Now, if you're a modeler and you're modeling your own stuff, great. We don't always have the luxury of being able to work on everything we model. Sometimes we are at the mercy of somebody else who models. Could be the owner's nephew, daughter, son. Could be a family member, doesn't matter, and you have to use their craft. And a lot of times you may not get paid to make it look better. And besides, if you're not getting paid to make it look better, don't make it look better. Work with what they give you. Until they say, you know what, can you make that look better? And you go, oh yeah, tack on a little fee on there. Okay? All about product negotiation. Right, so if I hit 5, that'll take me into shaded mode. Edge quality is acceptable. It's not the prettiest, but the shapes are okay. They're proportionate. And this will work for us. Now, as far as what you're actually going to be doing today, your scene has an MIA material X assigned to the geometry already for you. You're welcome. You don't have to worry about it. It's diffuse already. Your job is to light it, add an HDR into the IBL, make it look pretty, using the lighting scheme I'm going to show you guys. So this is a final version. I've got breakdown lighting renders for each step along the way. When you're done, at the very end, this is what the daytime should look like. And then you go in, you start working on the nighttime version. So the nighttime version, most of the light's going to come from the arm lamp. kind of lights do you think we're going to use to mimic the bulbs in that arm lamp?
Omnidirectional.
Yep. Actually, we could use a spotlight, but we chose to use a point light because it's going to mimic a real-world bare light bulb. Now, here's the deal. When you guys go to work on the night scene, remember that point light's really small. The position of that point light is more or less going to be inside the light bulb in the lamp. However, if you stick it inside the light bulb, what's going to happen? It's not going to show up. So what do you have to do? No? If you scale it and you make it bigger, it's only going to be the shade.
Emit from on.
Well, we could do that. However, that would make a big hole that's invisible. We use light linking. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah, I was just
Right. So we use light linking. Now, you only want to unlink that light from the bulb that it's in. Why? Because you want it to illuminate the other bulbs and all the rest of the geometry in the scene. Now, at the end, if you guys have time, we can also show you how to do something called a surface shader, which will give the illusion that the bulbs are actually on. Surface shader is a self-illuminating material you can apply to the light bulb. What it will do is, it doesn't actually illuminate everything, but it's visible automatically without any light on it. And I'll show you that at the end. But most of the illumination is going to come from the bulbs in the arm lamp. We're going to have a little bit of bounce light, fill light coming in from around the area. Right? There's another window behind the camera, so we're going to have a little bit of low-level light coming in there. This looks completely black, but there is a little bit of light coming in from the window. And in the end, this is what it's going to look like. All right, so we've got a template for you guys, and you're going to choose. Close all this garbage. All right, so we've got a big giant template for you with day and night renders in them, so you don't have to go back and forth and switch between. You got one template to worry about. Your daytime render goes here, your nighttime render goes on the other side. Make sure you snap it into place so there's no borders on it. Make sure that you save it in Photoshop as a targa. Okay, I started grading project 2, and sure enough, there are a bunch of people that changed the PSD to targa. It looks like a targa till you click on it and it says Photoshop file. And then I have a script that I run that reads all the files you give me to see if they're what we asked for, and it flags it as a PSD. Well, of course, there were some people that gave me outright PSDs too. Don't do that. All right. Make sure you're saving them as targa. Okay, here is your reference in the folder. There's daytime reference. Now, I've also got light placement guides for you guys. Right? This is perspective. This little icon right here, that's your sun. There's your area light for the window. Here's an overhead shot so you can more or less see where the light position is coming from. Now, these are, the breakdowns are not numbered. But here is the order. The very first thing that we're going to do is create an IDL, put an image in it, make sure final gathering is turned on, and render it out. Now, I know you can't see much here on the projector, but there is some light coming in from the IDL here. It's pretty low level. Another thing you're going to do, you're going to notice when you first bring your IDL in, your IBL is going to be much darker than this. And this is where we adjust the exposure. We make it look brighter to the camera to match the reference. The next thing you're going to do after you get the IBL all finished, you're going to work on adding the sun. Sun is what kind of light? Directional. That directional light is going to be outside the window. You're going to rotate it so you get the shadow positions that we have here. Notice, without any kind of area light or anything else going on, it's pretty dark in all the areas that don't have direct light in them. Now, you're going to leave final gathering on, you're going to leave the IBL in while you're working with the directional light for the sun. Once you've nailed the sun, you're going to turn it off or hide it. Put it on a layer, whatever you want to do. Then you're going to work on just the area light. That area light's going to give us the bloom, the ambient light, a lot of fill light in there. Right? Shadows are on, right? We're getting soft shadows from the area light to mimic an overcast day. Once you're done with the area light, if you position it in the window, you'll pretty much be able to line it up fairly quickly. This daytime lighting should not take a lot of time. You should be able to get this done before the end of lab and start working on the nighttime. Because the nighttime is going to take longer. Right. Once you're done with the area light by itself, then you turn on both lights together, and that is your final version. Remember, lighting's additive. All the intensities add up together, along with final gathering. Nighttime, same kind of breakdown, except you got more lights. Why? Because we're using a lot of low-level lights to simulate bounce light that we would normally get in the real world. Right? So we got an area light behind the camera. There's the camera. Behind the camera, there's a window here. Area light off camera to the right to simulate another room that may have light on in the kitchen, in the bathroom, in the hall. All right, window still going to have light in it, but really super low level. And then all of the point lights inside the arm lamp. There are going to be 4 bulbs in there. Okay, overhead view so you can more or less see where everything is. You're going to work the same way. The very first render you're going to do is going to be the IBL, and this time for the exposure, you're going to dial it down because you want it to look like nighttime. We're going to use the same IBL image, but you're turning down the color gain, the exposure. Now, it looks completely dark, but there still is some light in the sky in the image. It's really hard to see, but it's there. It's up here. Right, once you get that done, then you're going to start with the window light, the right fill light by itself, the light behind the camera. Then you're going to do the lamp. That's by itself. That represents just the 4 lights coming from the arm lamp. And then the final all together. All right. Back here. So first thing we want to do in order to work on this, we need to create an IBL. To create an IBL, you have to do that in the render settings. In the render settings, next to quality, there's a tab called Scene. If you click on Scene, About a quarter of the way down, you'll see an environment section. If you expand it, there's image-based lighting with a big giant create button. If you click that create button, that will create an IBL sphere and surround your geometry or whatever you have in your scene. Right now, there is nothing plugged into that IBL. So if I render it out now, it's completely invisible. So the first thing you want to do once you create an IBL is to bring in the image that you're going to put in there. That's your HDR image. We provide that for you guys. It is in the source images. So in the IBL attributes, at the very top, where it says image name, if you click the folder icon, that will send you right into source images. And the image you want is called DH211LP.HDR. You will not get a preview of it because Maya doesn't preview HDR images. Right? You click on it, click open, and then it drops in. Now, if you see this, that is not good. Yes, that is horrible. That means it's not mapped properly. We're giving you a spherical image. Mental Ray is expecting to map an image spherically. So you're double spherizing it. I know it's nice to get, extra for your money, but it doesn't work. So what we do is we change the mapping from spherical. The only other option is angular. Once you click on angular, it automatically pops into place. All is right with the world. There's rainbows, there's unicorns. Okay, Skittles falling from the sky. Now, you do not need to rotate the image. You do not need to rotate the IBL. If you go into your render cam, it will display the outside image perfectly for you guys. Now, at this point, you will probably want to render it out. So, in your render settings, under quality, you'll notice that we do not have our old friend legacy there. We are using unified sampling. Notice indirect diffuse GI mode is off. You need to turn it on. We want to use final gather. The default indirect diffuse quality for final gather is at 1. If you wish, you can leave it there. That's perfectly fine. So now, open up your render view. Right-click on the first icon and choose Render Cam. That looks nothing like an IBL light. What's going on here? Anybody know? Say it again. There is by default. Remember, there is default light in the scene, unless you turn it off. Remember, Maya always thinks that you want something to be visible in your scene. Now, I haven't added any lights, so Maya has not disabled the default lights. But I don't want to add any lights yet because I want to get my IBL squared away. I want to make sure that that is as bright as it needs to be. So we need to go in and turn off default lights. Does anybody remember where that is? Yes. Common tab? Bottom? Render options, right? Enable default light. Once you click on that or uncheck it, when you render again, now it's completely dark except for any of the indirect light final gathering is going to be able to give you. Let me turn off these little overhead ceiling lights so maybe you can see what it looks like. Notice also also, final gathering's taking its time. Do I need to wait around for a production version of Final Gather to render for me? You can if you want to. What can we do to trim down Final Gather render time?
Lower the 0.25.
What are we lowering though? Yes, very good. All right, so under quality, indirect diffuse quality, we're lowering that down to 0.25. So now, that took 39 seconds to render. So now when I render it, final gathering should not take its time, and it gave me a 6-second render. I can live with that. Right? It may look a little splotchy because final gathering's not got a lot of quality in it, but it's perfectly acceptable. So notice I've got a little bit of light here from my IBL that's coming in. What I need to do is compare this with my reference. So how do you load reference in? File, open image, find your reference. It's going to be in the reference images folder. Daytime. I want IBL FG. Going to keep image, render my scene again, and compare. All right, so final gathering, that part looks fine. How about the image outside the window? Mine is too dark, so I need to brighten that. This is where we go back into the IBL attributes. Now, if for some reason you accidentally deselect your IBL and lose your attributes, you can, 1, go to perspective, click on it, or 2, go to the outliner. In the outliner, there is a node called Mental Ray IBL1. Click on that, and that will give you your attributes. So now, in order for me to make this appear brighter to the camera, and it's only going to appear brighter when I render it, I need to go down under render stats. And the switch that I want to turn on, anybody remember?
Adjust environment color.
Yes, thank you. Adjust environment color effects. That enables color gain. Now, my color gain is cranked all the way up. So I can't make it brighter with the slider. I have to click inside the color swatch. If you click once, you get the simple color picker. If you double click, you get the advanced color picker that's got a window that won't go away until you say done. Personally, I prefer the simple color picker because it goes away automatically. It's like a dog when you holler at it, just go away. Okay, now you'll notice that value is what I need to change. It's already at 1. See, my value slider won't go any higher. What I can do down here is simply type a number in, hit enter, and now my IBL will be twice as bright. So I'm going to keep image, re-render it. Now, notice it doesn't actually make my whole environment brighter. I'm only making it brighter to the camera. We're going to get into another adjustment for the outdoor scene where it's more critical. But what I want to do is compare how bright my IBL is with the reference now. Too bright, right? So I doubled it. So what I can do now is go in, I'll cut it in half. So I was at 1, I turned it up to 2. I'm going to try 1.5. Render it out, see what it looks like. Be on my way, hopefully. All right, looks pretty good, huh? Now, you guys may see a little shift in the window frame. You see that? It looks like a shadow?
Yes.
It's really not. That's because I'm lazy. I'll be honest. And I found, after I had done this all together, I realized that the normals were flipped in the window. When I did the original reference, they were flipped. And I forgot to, every month I forget to change it. So, ignore any wobble that you guys see. Okay, so you see how mine is? If yours looks like that, that's perfectly fine. If you have a doubt, look in the archive for the lecture or ask me and I'll tell you. That's the only difference you should see. Everything else should look the same. Yours will look just like mine is right now. All right, so that's part 1. Done. Exactly. So now we go on to the second part, which is the sun. So before I even create a directional light, I'm going to bring in my reference. Now, all of the exercises you guys did before will help you with this. Because you're going to be matching light position, light intensity, light color, shadow quality. Right? So all those, the last 2 exercises that you did in lighting should all set you up to be able to do this fairly simply. Now, in order to get the color, I'll show you my approach. I'll show you 2 approaches you can use. You can use anything you want as long as your color is not too saturated or not too gray. And that's a danger when you sample colors right out of an image. But I'll show you how to get around it, sort of. Everything's a workaround. You'll find that out. All right, so first thing I want to do, what do I need to create? Directional light, thank you. All right, directional light, create lights, directional light, done. I'm going to wireframe. Why am I going to wireframe? Because I can see where my light is. It dropped in at the center of the world. That's not where I want it. So I'm going to drag my directional light outside the window because I visually find it easier to manipulate the light outside the window so I can see where the arrows are pointing rather than inside the room. Now, by default, are my arrows pointing in the right direction? No. So what I need to do is rotate them around. So I'm just going to rotate it, aim it inside the window. So if I render this out, notice I get it hitting everything that's vertical, but it's not hitting the floor at all. Remember, those light rays are parallel, so it's missing the floor completely. Now, if you want to, you can try using IBL. Oh, I'm sorry, not IBL, IPR. If you like pain and having headaches, then it's a good thing to use. I personally don't trust it. Because not only is it updating the regular render, it's also updating final gathering too. And every time I nudge this light, it's going to update itself. But if you kind of get away from that, it might be okay. Right, so what I want to do is, and there's another problem too. So I'm trying to look over at my reference and it's busy freaking out and having a hemorrhage. Alright, so what I need is, I need to adjust my shadows so they aim at an angle toward the wall. Now, notice that shape on the wall is much, much bigger than my reference. So I need to do what to my light? Angle it down more. Thank you. Alright, and I have a short attention span. I can't take that anymore. It's much quicker if I just hit the render button rather than just waiting for it to flip back and forth. There we go. Alright, so I need to aim it a little bit more, aim it down a little bit, make one change, maybe two at the most. When you start getting into fine-tuning your placement, only rotate it in one direction. Alright, so what I'm going to go for is my shadow position on the floor. What do I have to do to my shadows? I need to aim it a little back, just a little bit, like that direction. Okay, close, but I still need to bring it back just a little bit more. So I'm going to bring it back just a touch, re-render. Okay, shadows don't look too bad, right? On the floor, but how about the wall? Too big on the wall, so what does that mean? I need to angle it down just a little bit. Just a little bit. Now, you may find when you angle it down, since you've already rotated it in Y, that it's going to turn the Y-axis off just a little. So it may take a couple of tries to get it. Now it's off. Still looks a little long. Let me come down a little bit. That's about the length I want on it, but now I got to rotate this back because Maya hates me. All right, so that looks fairly good except for what? Yep, the shadows are too hard. So what is my shadow softness adjustment for a directional light? Well, the softness control. So shadow softness, directional light. Light angle. All right, I'm going to start off with my light angle at 1, see what that looks like. I don't need to render all these pixels. I'm just going to render that section right there. Notice my shadows are going to look grainy. And actually, that's, as far as softness goes, that's not bad. The quality's terrible. Now, I'm using unified sampling. So what I want to do is, instead of cranking up my shadow rays, I'm going to crank up unified sampling to make sure I can clean up my shadows okay. Right, so I'm going to start my render at 1. overall quality at 1. And I'm going to render out a small piece. Notice that I have 4 times the overall quality that I had, but it did not take 4 times longer to render. Now notice it cleaned up pretty good. I mean, it's not completely there yet, but this is what it looked like originally. Very grainy, looks like a picnic ant party there. So it is taking longer, took 2 seconds longer, but I have 4 times the quality. Now, I still have noise. So what I would do now is I would go in, if I were doing a final version, I would start increasing my overall quality. Little by little till I got it cleaned up. Notice that I should not need to adjust my shadow rays. Does that make sense? You guys with me on that? All right. So I got my light position, got the shadow quality okay. Now what I'm going to do is work on getting the intensity. Is my scene too bright or not bright enough? Not bright enough. All right, so what I want to do is, when in doubt, I'm going to double it, see what I get. If it's too much, I'll cut it back. Little too bright now. All right, so I'm going to split the difference again. And if I already know I can get nice clean quality, I'm going to turn down my overall quality to make my renders go faster. All right, so intensity, hard to tell. I'm going to try and get the color now and see if that's the intensity. Right. So when you guys were picking color for Project 2, how did you do it? You guesstimate? Yeah. Most of you? Okay, here's another way you can do it. Go to the reference. Inside the directional light color swatch, if you click once, notice I have this little magic eyedropper. If anybody's familiar with Photoshop, so what I can do is click on it, and then I can come in here, and I can go, oh, well, do I want to sample it here, or how about outside the window? Ooh, look, there's nice golden sunlight here. So let me render that out and see what it looks like. Now, if it's too green, I can go in and adjust the hue. If it's too, gray, I can go in and adjust the value. Looks a little dark. So what I'm going to do is go in, look at my colors, and I'm going to crank up my value, make sure it's all the way up. I think I'm actually going to drop my saturation just a little. And I can see my colors nice and golden. It's not on the green side, which it will look sickly if you have it too green. And I might need to crank the intensity up just a little. Now, one thing you also want to check out while you're working on this is go into your render settings, go down under legacy options, Go down under final gathering and make sure you have at least one secondary diffuse bounce down here. You should. Now, occasionally, we can add a second one, and that may throw a little more indirect light in there. The trouble with secondary bounces in final gathering, it only goes up to 5. If I do 5, it's going to flatten my whole scene out. Watch. I'll turn it all the way up. It doesn't go any higher than 5. If I render my scene, what it's going to do is start to kill all the contrast that I have in there. Now, it's not too noticeable right now. Once I add all the other lights, that's when it's going to pick up a lot more information. So, for starters, keep your secondary diffuse bounce to 1. Once you add all your lights, if you need it, you can turn it up to 2. Now, here's something else you can do. Notice that I'm getting a little more extra light in the reference. And it's not coming from the directional light. Directional light on the ground looks more or less like it does. But I'm getting a lot more light in here. In an environment, most of our environments have ceilings. What color are most ceilings? White. For a very good reason. Because they bounce light. So what we can do here is I can select my ceiling geometry. Yeah, and it's going to be Polysurface 39 or some terrible name like that. If you're not sure, just make sure you have it. What you can do is you can assign a brand new material X to it, make the color white, and then final gathering will have an additional surface to pull information off of. Now, to add a new material to a surface, you can do it a couple ways. Somebody give me one way. Yep, you can right-click and do what? Assign new material. You can also select it and hit the Shift-T. Shift-T brings up assign new material for you. What you want is mental ray materials, MIA material X. I highly recommend that you name it if you create one for the ceiling. What you want to do is turn off reflectivity. Take the color, turn it to white. So now when you render it, final gathering should have some more information to bounce around in the room. You may or may not notice it with the single directional light, but when you start adding the other lights, remember, lighting's additive. So the higher the light level in the room, the more the ceiling's going to contribute. You guys with me? Okay, good. All right, so what you would do at this point, save your scene. If you haven't saved it already, you should have saved it, when you first opened it. Save it out. This will be your daytime scene. You hide your directional light, go on, work on your area light for the window. Okay, let me show you guys real quick the nighttime scene So what I'm going to do here, save as again. Most of your light's going to come from the point lights in the arm lamp, right? You guys have the concept for that, right? When you are done, and you've got all your lighting done, this is only after you are done are you allowed to play with this. All right? You got to eat all your vegetables before you can have dessert. Or if you're a vegetarian, you got to eat all your tofu or whatever it is. Right, now, what I'm going to show you is how to assign surface shaders to the light bulb geometry. Because you want those bulbs to look like they're glowing, to look like they're emitting light, just like a real light bulb does. Now, first thing you're going to notice, got to turn off default lights. Turn off default lights, I render it out, all's well, it's gone. Right, so I'm going to assign the same surface shader to all the bulbs. Why? They're all going to be the same wattage, the same age, the same lumens, the same bulb information. Okay, same amount of dirt on them as all the other bulbs. All right, so I'm going to select the geometry, and I'm going to assign a new material to it using my fancy Shift-T. This time, instead of going under Mental Ray, I'm going to stay under Maya. I'm going to select Surface, and I'm going to go down to Surface Shader. Now, by default, my surface shader color is going to be black. A surface shader is a self-illuminating material. That means it does not need a light to illuminate itself to the camera. It will accept shadows, but it will not it will cast shadows, but it will not accept any shadows or light on it. So it completely ignores light when you throw it on it because it's self-illuminating. But if we want to make cheap, quick light bulbs, all we have to do is take the out color and turn that up to white. Now notice that my light bulbs are now white when I render it. They're visible to the camera. Notice this does not illuminate anything in my scene. It is not a self-illuminating material, or it will not illuminate anything else. It doesn't emit light. Right, so here, if I want to make this look a little more natural, light does what we call bloom, right? It throws off kind of a glow around a bulb. To do that in our surface shader, that is called outglow color. And if I turn my outglow color up just a little bit, keep image and render it, it creates a little bit of glow. Now, this gets to be really disgusting really quick. Yeah. All right, you want to use a little bit of outglow color. Just enough to make it bloom a little. Only do this after you've got all your lights done. This is not even the icing on a cake. This is writing your name after the cake's been iced and everything. Right? Because if you try to light with this on, you're going to be so distracted by shiny stuff that you're not going to be able to get your lighting right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Any questions? So when you guys get back, you're going to come in, do the daytime first. Yes?
You mentioned about the ceiling during the daytime.
Yes.
Turn it to white, get a little more brightness.
Yes.
Also use that for the night.
I would, yes. Only because, our ceilings are going to be white in daytime and or nighttime. And anything you can do to add a little bit of kick for final gathering is going to help it out. Good question. Any other questions? Yes?
Why is there an extra lamp in the sink?
Good question. I like that question. So we go, oh yes, I know why. Because I'm lazy. And I forgot to take it out. That's because this originally had another lamp in it. It's in the layers, right?
It's hidden.
Oh, okay, so it's in the outliner.
I hid the lamp in there, I hid the light.
Ah, there it is, right there.
I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
My stuff's not
That's because, face it, the arm lamp is cooler. So, we went to IKEA, we got the arm lamp, and, we just took our Walmart lamp and hid it. Nothing against Walmart, but, Yeah. So leave it off, delete it if it makes you feel better. If it gives you gratification, delete it and laugh while it dies. You can have a little bit of revenge for Maya. Yes. So get rid of it. Yeah, just select it, hit delete. All right. Any other questions? Good question. All right. Go to lunch. Or dinner, whatever it is. Go eat food. Go drink caffeine or whatever it is you do. Yeah. And come back at... Yeah. Come back 10 minutes ago. Come back at 7:50.